The session was actually, it's titled as Independence and Role of State in the Ambit of Amended Act, Role of State Regulator Post-Amendment as NTP, mandatory according to the bill. Of course, I would also like to add to it my perception of a few challenges that some of the regulators will have under the new regime where the content and carriage is sought to be separated. Apart from, there are certain other contradictions in the act itself, the bill. Now, as far as the role of the state is concerned, electricity actually is speaking strictly on a legal platform. Electricity falls in as entry number 38 of the concurrent list in the 7th schedule of the Constitution, which means that both the Parliament and the state legislatures can legislate on the subject of electricity. However, having said so, the Constitution provides that if the state enacts a statute or a law which is repugnant to that which is framed by the Parliament, then to the extent of such repugnancy, the state law will stand superseded, except if the change or the repugnancy is reserved for the consideration of the President and then gets his approval. So, to the extent that I feel that there might be a few ideological differences between what has been sought to be achieved through the amendment bill and how the states would look at their interest, and there's every possibility that some of the states might actually take the decision to bring about certain amendments after this bill, or if the bill becomes an act. Now, one of the things that Harry mentioned is the 61(2), where it says that the NTP will now be binding, or the earlier the term used was shall be guided by the tariff policy. Now it says that shall be followed by the State Commission. So basically, obviously, the language is a little more mandatory in nature. I think there's a reason to it, rightly or wrongly. See, electricity by its very nature, and I think all of us in this room know, there cannot be any boundaries in terms of transactions in electricity. I mean, you don't know which electron flows where. I mean, that's why this entire POC regime was brought in, because you don't know what is getting generated, who's actually consuming it. Contracts is a completely different thing. So therefore, and our entire network works on an integrated system. Every state is connected to the central grid, and so therefore there's a flow of energy throughout the system, whether at the state level or at the central level. So it becomes important, therefore, to set out certain basic principles that every state, or now the regulators, should follow to bring about some kind of a common practice, a meeting ground for generators, for licensees, for consumers. And it is with this thought in mind that the tariff policy had been initially drawn up in 2005. It came in effect in 2006, I think. But the experience has been that the tariff policy stays more like a piece of paper, and every state government, every state utility, every state regulator has its own views. To name a few, there have been repeated petitions filed before the appellate tribunal complaining about various state authorities not even taking up a tariff determination process. Forget the reasonable tariff, not even taking up tariff determination process over a period of time, just to stall the increase in tariff. I mean, because of various political or other implications. Then you have the open access. I think CERC gets flooded almost every day, every week, with applications where various state load dispatch centers and various state utilities come up with all kinds of excuses not to allow open access to either generators selling outside their state. And so, I mean, some of the examples. So somewhere there has to be a sense of respect and commitment towards that meeting ground that the central government is, has tried to form through the tariff policy, which obviously had not been happening. And the amendment to the Act, I think, is only a step forward to try and address that issue, the divergence of views because of different interests that financial, political, or whatever it is that different utilities and regulators may have. What comes in the policy and whether it is beneficial to everybody is a different issue. I mean, that can be challenged, that can be discussed. But the intent seems to be to bring everybody to a common ground on how to implement the Act. So now one of the major, talking about policy, one of the major and probably the basic intent of bringing about this amendment is the separation of the carriage and the content at the distribution level. At the transmission level, I think this distinction has been achieved quite efficiently, and it has been to a great extent, some of the state utilities which were earlier transmission licensees have been now barred under the 2003 Act from carrying out trading in electricity. So basically to diverge the interest, financial interest in terms of carriage and content. The same is sought to be now achieved under the new amendment. Question is, are we still ready for it? That's, it's good to have a change, but the question that one should look at when one is looking at a change is, are we ready for the change? Do we have sufficient data for the change to bring about a change? Is the change caused because of somebody's brilliant idea about how things should be, or is it really trying to address certain issues which have arisen while practicing the earlier regime? To me, some of these amendments, on a very personal note, appears to be not thought quite through and conflicting at certain areas. One of them being that with the change, with the separation in the content and carriage, with now you have a supply licensee, one or more supply licenses in the state, who are not allowed to develop their distribution network. I'm just thinking to myself that how is it different from a trader? I mean, a trader also buys power to sell power. He, of course, has a margin of, at least under the CERC Act, the CERC's regulation, there's a cap on the margin that he can charge. In other states, there aren't. Many of the states, there aren't. But the pricing is something which is, therefore, the discretion of the licensee. That's his financial motivation. But what exactly is the motivation of the supply licensee? Because The way I see it, it's the regulator who's going to decide what the tariff is going to be for the supply licensee. Now, I think most of us here know that under the present set of regulations that are mostly followed by all the states is for tariff determination on a cost plus basis. The cost plus, that is your return on equity, is basically worked out on your investments. For a distribution licensee, the investments are more into network development, network augmentation. This actually forms a significant part of the investment of a distribution licensee, and this is what actually determines the return on equity. It will be, I think, a concern for the regulators to therefore work out the basis for award of an ROE to the supply licensees, because in the process of procurement and sale of electricity, the involvement or investment in terms of funds is really not as significant. So therefore, what is the motivation? Because ultimately, if it's a 16% return on what you have invested, that may not be good enough, because for a purely supply business where the investments are really not too much. Plus, having said so, you then have to also work out how you're going to price.
Saket, sorry.
Yeah.
Did you say 16% rate of return on supply? Supply, are you reading supply as in distribution company, or are you reading supply as in trader?
No, 16% is what generally, or 16 or 55 or 15.5% is what the commissions allow as ROE on the investment. So I'm saying 15% on the investment, but really, I mean, the investment is not too big. So, to that extent. Then, of course, the issue is, then you have to also address the requirement of every consumer within your area of supply, which means you don't choose as the traders are allowed to do. But you don't choose, but under the amendment now, the entire scope of billing, collection, consumer complaint, metering, etc., are supposed to be looked into by the distribution licensee. So, where you have one distribution licensee and a host of competing supply licensees, let's say in a state or in an area you have 2 or 3 of them, one being the government licensee. How does one coordinate between the distribution licensee and the supply licensee in terms of network development? Because ultimately, network development has to be based on based on projections about your growth that you're looking at in terms of supply, network augmentation, strengthening, then, theft, metering issues, consumer complaints. When the two entities are separate, the sense of responsibility, of course, gets greatly diluted, because ultimately, who is going to be responsible for any kind of difficulty that is faced by the consumer? Coming to what Harry was mentioning about the consumer's choice. Merely giving 2 or 3 suppliers, more than one supplier, to the consumer to make a choice that who's going to supply cheaper may not be the end to the issue of consumer choice, because consumer choice is not only about the price of supply, but the quality of supply, the quality of the supplier's reaction to consumer complaints, and these kind of issues. So here really there are no clear boundaries of who is going to deal with these issues. Then the other aspect is accounting for open access. Now accounting for open access gets done today also, but here with the separation of the distribution from the supply licensee. So basically the system is being used by the supply licensee and is being used by the open access consumer also. Now let us take an example. The basic supply is being carried out by supplier A. Consumer X, however, thinks that generator G can give him cheaper power. So therefore, there's an open access arrangement which is worked out in the same area. Now generator G on a particular day is not able to supply. So it's very easy to then say that, look, generator G has not supplied, consumer has withdrawn the power. So therefore it has to, or it's obviously the supplier A whose power it has taken. So he has to at least compensate A for this. It gets a little complex when you have more than one supplier in the area. Whose power has actually flown in? At what price? So I think that's one area which the state regulators will have to address separately, that how does the accounting of open access transactions get worked out under an open access system. I think the first session, hearing Harry, I think, the issue of CS and CSS and probably regulatory assets has been debated in great detail, so I'm not going into that because, there's no point repeating issues. But
we'd like to hear, what are your thoughts on who will be blessed with the regulatory assets of 20,000 crores in Delhi? Is Mr. Kejriwal taking it on, or what is your prognosis?
Okay, Harry, you caught me on that. Actually, I really can't figure it out. I hope somebody can, but then yes, that's a basic issue. So you have these huge regulatory, gaps, the revenue gaps that you have of the existing licensees. Now, also under the Act, it's the incumbent licensee, distribution licensee, who also continues as the distribution licensee under the Act. So then, is this amount going to be transferred as part of the recoverables by the distribution licensee? Because clearly, there might be a little bit of inconsistency there, because most of the regulatory gap has arisen, according to at least the tariff orders, is not so much on account of the network cost, but on the cost of power. So if it is a gap created by the cost of power, then can the distribution licensee, merely because it's an incumbent distribution licensee, have the right to recover that?
Okay, hold on. Since you weren't here in the earlier sessions,
yeah,
let me share this with you. Imagine in the Delhi situation, the incumbent licensee DISCOM continues till he's separated as content and carriage. And imagine that the liability of 20,000 crores or whatever sits on his balance sheet. He's blessed with it. He's living with it. Now, he has to somehow recover that money. He's got these cheaper power wallas coming in, which don't have these legacy contracts and high-cost power contracts, which are long-term. The cheaper chaps are coming in and supplying power at half the price. Then, how will he compete? B, how will he recover his money? Somebody in the earlier session said the obligation, as I think Mr. Jain Dev said, his obligation is to pay the fixed charge to the generator, but he will not pay anything else. Question is, where does he recover his fixed charge from? Because if you are going to have true competition, then either this will go on the part of his USO obligation, which means the tariff in Delhi will rise, or to the ordinary consumer, on 1 megawatt and below, or he has to find some other way of doing it. One idea suggested by Balwant Joshi is to transfer this to the wires company. So it'll become part of the wiring, wheeling charge, and the money will get recovered over a period of time. But my question is, where's the competition? And how are you going to recover?
No, I mean, there's definitely an issue there because if you're going to recover it as a supply licensee, obviously, you're loaded with a baggage of the past, which will definitely make you not in a position to compete. Plus, the other issue, of course, that arises is that you will necessarily have to recover it through your distribution as part of your distribution charge, because now you're not allowed to supply. And that's at least for the private entities, because the act, as far as the government entities are concerned, in states where the network is owned by the state government utility, it still stays with the state government utility, but the act also mandates that there will be a state government company which will necessarily have to be a supply licensee. So, there are ways and means to work that out, because, it's ultimately going to the same exchequer. But taking the Delhi example, I think it's ultimately Reliance or the Tatas, if they have a huge amount sitting on their balance sheet, it's something which has to be then passed on as part of the distribution network cost. Which brings us to the next question. So therefore, where really is the choice? You are trying to give the consumers the right to look at a cheaper source of power. Well, as far as the past, the legacy is concerned, the consumers have to live with it because you don't have any other distribution license in that area. Which again, I think is a kind of a retrograde step, in the sense that the 2003 Act, there were issues of implementing it. Sir will know better because of the constant bickering between the Tata Group and Reliance, at least in Mumbai. But at least it was looking at a scenario where you had more than one licensee who had to develop their network. So if one of the network owners were not carrying out their functions properly, one could switch over to the other side, to one of the other options. Today, you don't have that option. You have to live with the distribution licensee, that is the network operator, no matter how he performs, because he's got kind of a right. Because it's his network, he has put in huge amount of money to build that network, and so therefore he's just sitting there and reaping the benefits. And there's nobody else who can actually come and start developing a network also. So that's a kind of a statutory monopoly which has been now built up by this act. There is a clause, of course, which was there earlier in the earlier act also for. I hope I'm not overshooting my time. Okay, so there was a the clause earlier in the act which allowed the revocation of license. That clause still exists. But if you look at a very, very, very realistic level, let us say that the distribution licensee is not able to perform, and therefore the commission issues a notice that, sorry, your license is going to get cancelled. I am very doubtful how many courts in India will actually allow that process to go on, and especially taking into consideration that in majority of the states still, the distribution network is still owned by the state government. I mean, sorry, state government companies or state government utilities. So where you have huge amount of money being invested by a state government utility into a system, into a network, and which is, the moment you have monopoly, you become, relaxed. I mean, you don't then aspire for the levels of standards that you would if you have a competitor. So despite, in these kind of situations, it is most likely, and certainly likely, speaking as a lawyer, that the courts will stay any such proceedings saying that, sorry, I mean, you should work it out in a different, you should look at other options, because it's ultimately the state exchequer's money which has gone into the development of the systems, and we cannot now allow it to be taken over by some administrator or some third party. Then there are certain contradictions within the act, very, very, very apparent contradictions. That is, what is the difference between the wheeling and the distribution charge? Distribution charge is something that will be determined in accordance with the tariff, while the wheeling tariff is getting determined. So, really speaking, all that the distribution licensee is doing is just wheeling. So why the requirement for a different wheeling charge and a distribution charge? Then again, for the determination of tariff for the supply licensee, while one of the provisions says, 551D, which is 2, says that it has to be determined by the regulator. But at the same time, clause 5 says it has to be market determined. Completely two different approaches. If it's a market determined price, I mean, obviously the one who has drafted these two clauses has no idea what the concept of competition law is. If it's a market determined price, you don't need a regulator to come in. And a regulator comes in only where the market determination of price cannot be carried out in a transparent manner. So these are things that need to be thought through in order to bring in a more implementable. I'm not saying that the carriage and content, separation of carriage and content is something which cannot be implemented, but probably a little more thought has to go into it. And just to end this, I think some of the challenges for the regulators because of this amendment is, what is the protocol to be developed for the coordination and functioning of the distribution and the supply licensee together? How do they contract within each other? How are the dues recovered? If the dues are not recovered fully, then what amount goes to whom? Does the distribution licensee gets paid first or the supply licensee? Then metering. If there's a defective metering, it's ultimately the supply licensee which has to pay the price. So the onus may not be so much on the distribution licensee to look at metering issues, similarly with theft, and so on and so forth. Then the other thing that I mentioned, how to plan network development, because ultimately it's the commissions which has to approve the cost of network development. So what are the projections? Who will give the projections? And are those projections in line with how the distribution licensee looks at its projection of development of network? Then and energy accounting for open access. Then tariff for supply licensee, sir, I would actually like to hear from you how you are planning to do how you would want to do it for the supply licensee, who basically has no hard costs involved. Then the other issue is renewable energy generation, very laudable purpose. Today, the renewable energy certificates are more like toilet paper, not even selling at ₹1.50. Harry, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. So the thing is that having a 10% kind of an incremental renewable energy generation for every thermal plant that you have, well, the intention is very good, but where does one sell it? And at least the competitive bid documents as they reflect today do not have a combination of the two together. I mean, I would have understood if the government said that, look, if you're doing a competitive bidding under 63, you have to take thermal. If you're procuring from thermal, you have to take 10% of the renewable also. That bid also has to come from new plants. Probably that would make sense. But today states are essentially reeling under huge deficits, revenue deficits. Nobody is looking at expensive power. I'm not saying therefore that renewable should not be developed, but then the problem remains. There are various states where the renewable obligation is being rolled over year on year, and the distribution licensees are not actually procuring, and they're rolling over these obligations. So in this kind of a scenario, actually bringing in, there are, various, there are various projects which are being developed, like the JNNSM by the government for encouraging renewable energy as such. Having an incremental 10%, it's a huge quantum. Where's the market for it? The other issue is the pricing and recovery of the spinning capacity. Now, it's very good to say that, every generator should keep a spinning capacity. Who's going to pay for it? How is that going to be worked into the tariff? Are the state utility, are the state commissions going to allow this spinning reserve, saying that, look, the tariff policy had said so, and therefore, we'll allow a part of it. That spinning reserve may be used for some other state. So why should my consumers pay for the spinning reserve, which, which I may or may not allow? Let us look at a situation here. Power is being supplied to states A, B, and C. A and B are compliant with their PPAs. A and B are compliant with their scheduling that are done by the regional load dispatch. C has a problem. He overdraws. The spinning reserve then gets divided between A, B, and C, the cost, if it is allowed to be divided. But ultimately, the spinning reserve more likely is going to be used for C at most times, because he is the one who's defaulting, or he is the one who is not falling in line with regard to his scheduling and his contractual requirements. So that's another issue. So I guess these are some of the issues that kind of came into my mind when I was just looking at the act. Actually, I had to kind of rush in for this. So probably the next time I'm speaking, I'll have a more exhaustive list of issues. Thank you very much.